It's right about 8 o'clock and I am beginning the recording, checking am I recording, I am bouncing. So it is 8 o'clock on September 27th, 2018. This is the lecture that was scheduled for September 9th. Excuse me, September 28th, i.e. tomorrow, Friday, at the regular meeting time is 10 o'clock on Fridays. Unfortunately, I had to move this one up a little bit because of an unavoidable conflict. Circumstances beyond my control meant that I could not be there tomorrow. Therefore, the regularly scheduled lecture of ITSC 2309 is being moved to this time, which is 8 o'clock on September 27th, a Thursday. And I'm going to just go ahead and begin. I'm going to try to get done with this fairly quickly. Let's see. We will resume normal meeting schedule on Friday. I believe, what is that? October 5th will be our next scheduled meeting. Let me check that, make sure I'm saying that correctly. Yes, Friday, October 5th is our next regularly scheduled meeting. I'm going to drop back a little bit and cover some stuff that I neglected to cover as I was going over the recordings of the lectures. Let's see, I'm going to use the ScratchDB for a minute, and I'm going to create just a simple little table. I'm going to call it test. It has one lonely little integer in it, and that is the primary key. This is not a good way to do constraints. I really don't want to see your constraints done like this. I would prefer that you say constraint, give it a name, and then primary key, and in parentheses you'd say PK. But this will work. And when you get to the advanced class, you get to clip the syntax, but we're going to mess with it here a little more. And I'm going to insert some values into this PK field, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I could have used an identity, but hey, notice that I did not drop the table. So if I try to execute this, it's not going to work. Now, the question is, let's talk about this idea of betweenness. If I say select the primary key from test where this PK is between 3 and 5, what am I going to get? Well, what could I get? I could get 4. 4 is between 3 and 5. I think I'm going to get 4. Will I get 3? Well, in many languages and in many of the logic, much of our logic, we do include the beginning of a betweenness sequence, but not the last. So 3 and 4 might be what it's talking about. For example, lots of times computer science will say, you'll hear people say, we start counting at 0, which isn't entirely true. I'll talk more about that later. So I might be 3 and 4, but then, so I might just, how many values will I get? I might subtract 3 from 5 and say I'm going to get 2 values. So that might be 3 and 4, or I suppose it could be 4 and 5, or it could be 3, 4, 5, or it could be just 4. And I don't really know. I just have to try it. So I'm going to execute this and find out what values are between 3 and 5. Execute, and I get 3, 4, 5. So when you say between, you include the beginning and you include the end. Okay? I'm not going to ask, are there any questions, because I see I'm by myself this morning online, but that's okay. Whether I am or not, you're still responsible for this. Now, let's change it a little bit, and let's select PK from test where they're between 5 and 3. Now, I would say to you that betweenness doesn't matter where you start and where you end. Betweenness, I should still see 3, 4, 5. But when I say between 5 and 3, I have kind of it comes as a shock to me. I don't get anything between 5 and 3. Now, wait a minute. 4 is between 5 and 3. So it matters. It has to go in ascending order when you're using betweenness. And it includes the starting point and it includes the ending point. So you just have to adjust them. If you only want to see 4, you'd have to say between 4 and 4, I guess. Okay, let's look at how I think it's done better. I do not like this idea of between. I can live without it. I'm just not even going to use it. Here's what I'm going to do. Instead of saying between, I'm going to say select PK from test, where PK is greater than or equal to the beginning value. Now, I don't have to say greater than or equal to, I could just say flat greater than. So if I want to include the beginning point, I'm going to say greater than or equal to. If I don't want to include the beginning, I'm just going to say greater than. Similarly, in the upper bound, I'm going to say less than or equal to the upper bound of the betweenness. And I'm going to say less than or equal to if I want to include that upper bound, or I can just say straight less than. If I said less than on both of them, the only thing I would see would be the 4. Because 4 is greater than 3 and 4 is less than 5. But if I say greater than or equal to and less than or equal to, when I run it, I'm going to get exactly the same output as I would with the betweenness. Now, there is a little bit of a thing here in computer science and programming in general. You are always going to have to say PK is greater than or equal to 3 and PK. In other words, we have to repeat the PK, less than or equal to 5. You cannot say where PK is greater than or equal to 3 and less than or equal to 5. That's a no-no. Okay, that won't work. It will not work in any programming language I know of. So where PK, where something is between, you cannot say where whatever that thing is, PK in this case, is greater than 3 and less than 5. That's just not going to work. Anytime you have an and an or, the statement on either side of the and or the or for that matter, whichever, has to be a complete statement. You don't get to shorten it any. So where PK is greater than or equal to 3 is one statement, where PK is less than or equal to 5 is another statement. And you cannot drop out that using that field name or variable name or whatever it is. Well, we don't have variables in this class yet. You'll get them soon enough in the next class. Question, well, don't have anybody online. So if you have questions on that, you can send me a Canvas message. By the way, if I change it a little bit, change it around and reverse the order of them, it doesn't do anything. So I'm still going between 3 and 5, where PK is less than or equal to 5 and PK is greater than or equal to 3. Now, notice that the betweenness still holds. It doesn't matter which direction you're going in. So it doesn't matter which one you put first, which one you put second if you use this method. Betweenness, though, it matters. If I say between 5 and 3, I don't get anything. So it expects the first one to be less than the second one. And if you use the greater than or equal to, or just greater than, whichever you want, I have full control over what I want to see. For example, if I change it to, if I want thing greater than or equal to 3, in other words, I want to include the beginning point, but not the end point, I can do that quite easily, execute, and I see only 3 and 4. If I want to include the, if I want strict betweenness, not including either endpoint, I just make them both greater than, less than. I don't have to adjust my values any. When I execute, I only get the ones that are truly between. So if I say between 3 and 07, for example, so this should get 4, 5, and 6. 4, 5, and 6. Now, if I want to include the endpoints, all I have to do is throw in an equal, and I'll get them. As long as I keep this greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, straight. If I reverse these arguments to the and, then it doesn't matter. Okay. If I change it around to PK, where PK is, I want everybody else, I want everybody except these, I can just change them around if you think about it a little bit. If I made PK, let's see, I'm going to make PK less than or equal to 3. Okay, I'm going to make a change. And PK greater than or equal to 7. Now, what will I see in this case? So I've changed it to less. I've changed the less than, greater than to less than, and vice versa. When I execute this, I don't see anything. Why not? Well, because it's impossible to be less than 3 and at the same time be greater than 7. That's not possible. So if I want everything else, I want 1 and 2, 1, 2, 3, and I want 7, 8, 9, how many I have in there, 7 and 8, I have to change this to an or. So the bottom line is, by using this compound condition with greater than or equal to, I get a whole lot more of, so here I see 1, 2, 3, but I do not see 4, 5, and then I see 7 and 8. And I see that, hello, Salima. Okay. So let me push this down. And so anyway, but the idea being here that I prefer not to use between. So if I say, between 3 and 5, I prefer, instead of this, so select from this test table between 3 and 5, it is much better to say where it's, I'll change this back, whether it's greater than or equal to 3 and PK is less than or equal to 7. So this is preferable because I have a lot more control over it. So I don't use the term between very often. Questions on that may be directed to the Canvas mail. Okay, let's see. The term like gets into what we call a regular expression. And the idea is that when I say select vendor name from vendors where vendor name is like A, followed by anything. So this would select A, it would select Apple, it would select Aardvark, anything that begins with A followed by 0 or more other characters. So when I'm looking at the output of this, I have to use AP here. Use AP. And then I'm going to execute this, and I see Aztec Label, I see AT&T. Everybody begins with an A, and I get all of them that begin with an A. So A followed by 0 or more. If I made that like AB, okay, when I run this, I'm only going to see, I believe, Abbey Home Furnishings. This one, Abby, because it begins with AB. I think it is not, unless I change something about the server. I do not believe that it is case sensitive. Let's run a test on it and find out. Notice that the uppercase B matched the lowercase b. So by default, a string search is not case sensitive. Now, there is a flag that I can set that says, okay, make it case sensitive. And I'll talk about that later. For right now, we're just going to assume nothing about SQL is case sensitive, although I can make a quoted string search be case sensitive. Okay, well, but that wasn't what I wanted to do, let's say. I didn't want A, B. I wanted everything that begins with an A or everything that begins with a B. Well, one option This was like one that you had, like A, or like, and again, I'm going to have to specify the vendor name because I'll never be able to get away with saying vendor name like A or like B. So I'm going to have to say vendor name again, and then I put B in here. So I'm just going to have to say that copy and paste is my friend, where vendor name is like A or vendor name is like B. And this will work. This will give me, let's order by. Order by the vendor name so we can see them all easily. And when I execute this, I get all of the A's, and I get the B's starting, and the B's also. I get 15 records this way. And that's fine. You can do it that way. There's one of them that says find all the last names that begin with A, B, C, or E, I believe it is. A, B, C, D. Maybe throw out the D. So it does that just to be a little cantankerous. You could do it like that. You could say where vendor name, I think it's vendor contact last name or something. There's some field that we're using. It's not vendor name. Excuse me. Like A, or vendor name like B, or vendor name like C, or vendor name like, well, we're not doing D, but E. So that would do it. This is a better way to approach it, though. Select vendor name from vendors. When I put it in square brackets, it takes any of those. So it's either A or it's B, whether it starts with A or it's B. I want it to start with A or B. And I'll show you some other options. Execute. Notice that this one again gave me the 15 records. So this one is just like that one. So I could put A, B, C, and E in here, and that would work. If I said, let's see, A or B. Do I have any double A's? Let's see, I got Abby. I'm looking for one. Anyway, I could say it begins with either an A or B, followed by an A. Remember, it will be non-case sensitive. So if I execute this, I'm going to see anything that begins with either an A or a B, and the second one has to be an A. Let's find out how many of those I have. So all I have is Baker. I was hoping I had something that began with an A and B where the second one was the same, but I don't have anything like that. Okay, anyway, that's like. It also allows wildcards in here, a lot of other stuff. I'll let you take a look at that. This comes from the field of computer science known as regular expressions. So this is called a regular expression. Now, we don't generally, I hate to use the word like, but we don't, I don't generally go into a name, but if you have to, this is the way you do it. You can go in and pull out a last name or a first name. In fact, that's an exercise we do. Lots of times people will set up a database and they will put name, client name, and they have Joe Blow in there in quotes, just Joe space BLOE, Joe Blow. And now they want to do something and they need to just get the client's last names. And now they have a problem because they essentially have two values in that same field. And remember, that was one of our basic rules of the database, that a field contains only one value. So for example, this vendor name is Baker and Taylor Books. That's not three values, that is one value. And I should never want to go in and pick off that first word. Nah, it happens. So all rules are made to be broken. Only when you have a really good reason. So this is review from back in what? This is from chapter module. I believe that's going to be module 5. So that's just plain old select from where. Stepping ahead now, going up to module 6, which is where we get the idea of the inner join. Inner join. Sometimes if this line gets long, I will break that line and tab it. When I have to break a line to keep it from scrolling off the end of the page, I don't like it when my code scrolls off. Doesn't hurt anything, but in my opinion, if it gets real long, I try to break it so it stays on the same sheet. So from invoices as we talked about this one, and we talked about the other version of this. Let me do a copy, paste, invoice number from invoices as I. So this is the old syntax, vendors as V. Okay. I want you to understand this is old syntax. And we call this an implicit join. An implicit inner join, I'm going to say. They are both inner joins. The newer syntax says select invoice number vendor name from invoices as I, inner join, vendors as V on vendor ID equals vendor ID. Notice that they both have the same information in them. They both have the table names. They both have both table names. And then they both have explicitly a way to talk about which field is the join field. The join field will usually be what is the parent table here. Let's see, the parent table is one vendor has many invoices. One invoice has only one vendor. So the vendors table is the parent. I usually start with that, and then I see I didn't in this case. I said from vendors as I. But one of the properties of an inner join is it doesn't matter which one comes first. You're going to see everybody that participates in the relationship. The old syntax has everything. The new syntax also has this vendor ID. I'm going to go ahead and change the order of these around. I don't like having that backwards. I took this off of the Canvas page. Now I have it. I start with the parent key. That's just the way I do it. You don't have to. I start with the parent key as V, inner join, and the only reason I have to say as V is I don't like typing. If you want to type vendors.vendor_ID and invoices.vendor_ID, that's okay with me. You don't have to do this part.
Professor.
Okay. So you don't have to say you don't have to rename it. But if you don't rename it, then you have to type it out here. Once you remember, if you alias something on the from line, you can use that alias any place in the select statement, any place in the statement. You can use it in the where, you can use it in the select. So if it's aliased on the from line, that's the first one that happens. Now, if we execute this, I believe we see, 113 rows, and we could go look at them. And so what this is doing is showing us, this is an exercise, a U-Triad exercise where I give you the solution. So I see the invoice number, vendor name, invoice number, vendor name. And it's, I believe it's, since the vendor name is a primary key, we see it ordered by vendor name. Well, not always, do we? You can't count on it having any kind of order unless you give it a specific order.
Can I ask a question?
Somebody's talking. Go ahead.
Yes, Professor. So how is the inner join and concatenation, what is it called? The plus sign, how are they different?
The inner join is logically following a primary key to its foreign key. Now, concatenation, if I want to select, I say select.
So maybe concatenation is just joining two values?
Yes, it is. Big plus Big Bear. Okay. If I say select Big Bear like that, I should see it when it does, or it puts it together. Okay. Now, if these were varchar fields, it would put them together. For example, what is that? What do we have? We have vendor, contact, F name, vendor contact. I'm going to put this as L name. From vendors, and that should work. So if I execute this, I'm going to see the name, but I won't see a space between them. It's just going to shove them all together. So if I want to see a space between them, so plus in this case, we say that this plus operator is overloaded because when you put it between two varchars, it acts like it just puts them both together. So if I put another one in there and I say single quote, space quote, and then another plus, now when I execute this, I'm going to see the first name followed by the last name. If I want to change them around, I can make this be the last name and then plus, and I put a comma and a space in there. So if I put the comma in the space, when I execute it, I'm going to see the first name followed by a comma, followed by a space, and then the last name. If I change the L name and the F name, then I will see Francisco, comma, space, Alberto. But this concatenation thing is based on strings. When we covered the concatenation, or when the book covered concatenation, it had not done the join yet. So the join is something different. Did I answer your question?
Yes, but what I wanted to understand was that where do we exactly use inner join?
You use inner join anytime I need information from both tables. So let's look at the inner join. I want to see here the invoice numbers paired with the vendor names. So I'm interested in listing the and let's order by let's order by v.vendor ID. Now, I'm going to have to say down here on the order line, I can't just say vendor ID. Why? I've got two of them. I've got a vendor ID in both tables. So if I just said, if I wanted to check, vendor name is not in both tables, so I can just say order by vendor name. If I were selecting invoice number and vendor ID, well, I'll do that in just a minute. So when I execute this, I see the vendor names in order. They were the second one that was selected, but they're ordered, and the invoice numbers that go with them. So the invoice number gives me just one vendor ID. Each invoice number has only one vendor ID, but notice vendor name. But notice a vendor name may be associated with more than one invoice. So we have a foreign key, primary key relationship here.
Okay.
Some properties of the inner join. Okay, first property of the inner join, I will only see records that participate in the relationship. I will only see primary keys that have a foreign key child. If they do not have any invoices, I will not see them in the output.
Okay.
Second property of the inner join is that it doesn't make any difference what order you write these, what order you write these, and what order you write these. Okay, I can switch these guys around. I can switch these guys around, and I will get the same output.
And we don't put comma after listing the table, like say from
Here?
vendor, the only, no. So after vendors, I know you have as V because it's just shortening the name. That's fine.
Right.
But if I want to say just from vendors, inner join, there's no comma in between. The syntax will be correct.
Right, there is no comma. In fact, if I put a comma here, you mean, if I put a comma there, notice I start getting red lines.
Okay.
Don't get too upset over these red lines. Sometimes they're just wrong. They're usually correct at this level, but when you start writing more complicated code, you'll have red lines all over the place, and there's a way you can turn them off. And they're not always right. Okay.
Thank you.
Now, a couple of things about this syntax. I'm a little bit fussy in this class. There is, copy, paste. Now, it is possible to drop the inner join. If you just say join all by itself, it has to be an inner join. Okay, it is possible. I will not be happy if you write this. So don't do this. I'm going to put this right here. Don't do this. In other words, I have dropped out the inner. I said just join. It is also possible to shorten it a little further. Vendors as V. So I can drop the as. And by the way, if I want to alias something up there, I don't have to put as. I can say INV. If I want to alias this on the select line, I can do so by, I'm supposed to have an as in there, but if I drop it and do not put a comma, it can only be an alias. So I can drop the as here, and it can look like this. Now this will run just fine. Notice that it aliased that column name. So the column name was aliased. It gave me an inner join, because if you say join, it can only be an inner join. Vendors, V, it aliased the table name, and it aliased this table name. I still had to say I.vendor ID equals V.vendor ID. So don't do this. We are going to write, when we write it while we're practicing it in this class, we're going to write the full syntax. Now, if you decide to sign up for my advanced SQL programming class, advanced database programming, then you're allowed to shorten the syntax because I figure we know what we're doing by then. So we're going to write the full syntax out. We're going to write inner join, and when we're aliasing something, we will always put an as between it. Questions on that? We will always write inner. We will never write join, but before it does not come inner. And there's going to be one other one that I'm going to introduce today, and that is the idea of the outer join. Okay. If you just say join, it has to be inner. But we won't say it. We'll always say inner join. And I'm going to fuss and throw a fit if you just start writing join. And somebody will, because you see a lot, if you look online, you'll find that a lot of the authors will just write from vendors join invoices. Yeah, they do that. But not my students in 2309 don't do that. So I hope I'm going to hold you guys responsible for this syntax. And if I see if I see this one, I'm going to yell at you. At least for this class. Like I say, it's not necessarily that bad. It works. Yes, it works. But I want to at least teach the full syntax questions. Pausing for any questions. Okay, inner join follows a foreign primary key link. Think of it as always being a foreign key to a primary key. However, it does not have to be. It just doesn't make much sense for me to join a table of employees with their salaries. I join the salaries to their children's shoe size. What does that tell me? Where the salary is equal to your shoe size? It doesn't make any sense. So they have to be the same thing. It doesn't make any sense to join your name to the make of car you have, because I would only include people whose name was Chevrolet. I get maybe there might be people like that, but it doesn't make any sense because your name is not related to your shoe size. So an inner join follows a foreign key primary key because they have some relationship between them. If they don't have any relationship, then why have the link? Foreign key simply assures that the primary key is in the table. Foreign key may be null. In an inner join, only records that participate in the relationship will appear in the output. This one has an exclamation point after it. So that's important. That's a property of the inner join. The inner join is also independent of order. You can order the tables any way you like. Parent records without children will not appear in the output of an inner join. Orphans, null foreign keys, I mean, if it's got a null key, will not appear in the output. It is possible to get children with invalid parents in a database. It is not good, but it is possible. If somebody did not set up that foreign key constraint correctly, you can easily have invalid foreign keys. In fact, I have put some of those in our AP database deliberately. They shouldn't be allowed by the foreign key, but sometimes people make mistakes and they don't code them right. These records will not appear in the output of an inner join. This is the old syntax. Mostly going to be using the new syntax. Here's the exercises. I'm going to go ahead and assign these today. I don't think somebody has already submitted. I have them. I haven't put a due date on them, but I will today. Edit. What day shall I make them due? They're not real difficult. Any feedback? This is today. Tomorrow?
Oh, next week is fine.
Okay, we'll make them do.
Week after week?
No, I'm gonna make them do next class meeting day. This will be the next time we will meet. Will be on October 5th. Actually, you should have them done before then, but they're not that difficult if you think about them. You've done this in a select statement using the explicit join, in other words, inner join, where we turn the vendor name and the vendor and the invoice number. That's what I just did. Okay, so the bottom line is this is the answer, but you're not supposed to look at that. Write it yourself.
If you say so.
Okay, yes. And my students always do what I tell them to do. Right. Okay, one of them in here. Okay, this one on number 3, I said I want you to do this one with an explicit. So if you write this one, you don't have to rewrite the whole thing. It is the same logic. All you're doing is just changing the syntax a little bit. So you just change the syntax. So you don't have to do the whole thing again. For number 4, I tell you some things. I show you this, that the default account number from the vendors table references the GL accounts, the general ledger accounts. And I have to tell you this before you can write. You have to either know this or I have to tell you this. So I'm telling you that the default account number is the foreign key and that the account number is the primary key. So they are not always named the same. In this class, they will, I'm going to say always, I think it's always, this one will always be a foreign key to this one. So I always have a foreign key, parent key. This is the mini, sideways 8, and there's the key 1. One account number in the GL accounts can have many default account numbers referencing it. So you take stuff from the vendors table and the GL accounts table. I tell you that the invoices table references the vendors table. And then the invoice line items table references the invoices table. Thus, I can have 3 fields in an inner join. So what am I trying to do? 4.5 says, write a select statement that takes the vendor name from the vendors table, takes the invoice date from the invoices table, and it takes something, sequence number, from the invoice line items table. So we have 3 tables in the join. Don't pay a whole lot of attention to returns 118 rows. If yours is slightly different, it's okay. A-okay. If you get 117 rows, don't worry about it. If you get 5 rows, there's something wrong. Lots of times I'll make a change to 1 or 2 records in there. For example, I might put an invalid foreign key in there just to confound things later, and that number of 118 might change. So don't worry about that too much. Just something around that would be good. Okay, next. Oops. That's not supposed to. Have to check that one. I don't want to show the solutions yet. Okay, we're ready to move on. The next one is that I've talked about. We have an inner join, and let's see, it's not time to go to take a short break yet. Outer join. Well, we have the inner join and we have the outer join. Now, the outer join is different. Inner join essentially follows a foreign key to its primary key parent. Um, so it's not entirely true in all cases. It's pretty good definition. They have to be related somehow. I mean, I'm not gonna, as I was pointing out, I'm not gonna try to join your name to your make of car. That doesn't make any sense. Although I can do it. Um, and I guess Henry Ford owns a Ford, so he would certainly appear in the output. But Joe Blow, there's no car named Blow that I know of. Recall the basic property of inner join is that rows in any join table that do not participate in the relationship do not appear in the query output. This means that I can tell you nothing from a join. I can tell you nothing about a childless parent. I can't tell you how many I have or anything. I can't tell you anything about orphans or children with invalid parents. They just don't have it there. Inner join. All inner join queries in all database products behave in this manner. So I'm talking here about pure SQL. I'm going to take off this headset now and put it down around my neck, so I might not answer you right away. Okay, outer join. We will revisit our parent-child table. Did I... Okay. Basically, say revisit this. I don't know why I put in this, the child. I put a null into the child table. I deliberately put an orphan into the table. I don't need an inner join to find orphans. I can find orphans by looking simply at the child table where the foreign key is null, is all I have to do. I don't have to have an inner join to find orphans. Best example of an outer join, I think I'm going to go back and revisit this one, and I'm going to select from vendors. I want to find, if I change this from an inner join, let's change it from an inner join to an outer join. And my inner join returned 113 rows. If I change it instead to an outer join, now I'm going to get a red mark here. If I change it to an outer join, yeah, don't worry about the red mark. I'll fix that in just a second. Now, the join has at least two tables, and the join has two tables, and I might have other joins in there. I might have this joined with something else. For right now in the outer join, we're going to have two tables. Now, if I am reading, let me pull this one back up here. So I have a table that is on the left of this outer join, and I have a table that is on the right of the outer join. This is as I'm reading from left to right. This is the left table. This is the right table. So it's about to matter now the order of the tables. If I say a left outer join, notice now I've lost my marks. If I see a left outer join, I will see all records from the left table, whether they participate in the relationship or not. And I will see the records from the right table that do participate. Pause there for a minute. I will see all records from the vendor's table, no matter whether they participate or not. And I will see the records from invoices table that do participate. I am pausing for comments. Okay, now I'm going to move on and execute it. When I execute this, I'm going to see more than 113 rows. Notice now I got 201 rows. And notice that lots of my invoice numbers are null. I have quite a few nulls in the invoice numbers. So what does this mean? I see all of the records that participate. So for example, in row 67, this is a record that participates. So invoice number 4-342-8069 is associated with the Federal Express Corporation, and so on. All of these guys are associated. But let's look at this one. Line 100, for example, Frank E. Wilbur Company has no invoice numbers. Why is this useful?
Is it because
What is in this this outer join that is not in the inner join?
is it
Next, more
because
information.
is it because
Put
that you're trying to
my headset back on. Okay, go ahead.
is it because that we are trying to that why they didn't get charged, or
Well, we're seeing child, if the vendor is the parent and invoices are the child, we're seeing childless parents. So, for example, on line 100, just for example, down here, line 100, the Frank E. Wilbur Company is a childless parent. It has no invoices. The Fresno Credit Bureau has no invoices. Fresno Photo Engraving, similarly, no invoices. IBM has at least one. In fact, they have two. Gostanian General Building has one. What am I finding here? When I use a left outer join, what am I finding? I am finding in here, I will include childless parents. Most of the time, I will use a left outer join. I'm going to talk about a right outer join in just a moment. But most of the time, I say this join points left. This join points left. If it were a right outer join, I would say it points right. Now, let me show you something else. If people do this, I will not be happy. What would happen if you just said left join? There is no such thing as a left inner join. So it must be a left outer join. Similarly, a right. Do not ever write join that you don't write either outer or inner in front of it. So we have outer join and inner join. If it's inner join, it does not have a left or a right. If it says left, now later on, if you drop the word outer, that's your business. In this class, we're going to use the word outer. So when I, now if I'm interested in these childless parents, these vendors with no, so I want vendors with no invoices. Okay. Sometimes I break them down. Okay. How, what am I interested in? I'm only interested in my where here. I only want where the invoice number is null. So I'm only gonna, I don't want parents with children. I'm only interested in the parents without children. So I have to look at where the child, So I point to the parent, left outer join points to the parent, and where the other one is null if I want, now maybe I want them all. I mean, that's quite possible. But this particular one is only going to select childless parents. And notice that I have 88 childless parents. You see that down here in the rows, 88 of them. What about them? They're all null. Oh, gee, well, what's the point then in including the invoice number? Because if the invoice number is null, all I'm going to see there is nulls, so it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to include anything from the invoices, because they're guaranteed not to match anything. So if I just want if I just want childless parents, I execute, and here I see the parents that are childless, one row at a time, and then I can order by or anything else like that. Yes, I do have it ordered by vendor name. I must not have executed that. They're not ordered. I don't know why. I must have. There we go. I didn't highlight that last row. So this is a childless parent query. Childless parents. Okay, it points at left. I could also do a right outer join. A right outer join would take everything from the table on the right. So this is left. This one goes right and drops down here. This is the right table. This is the left table. It makes a difference now which table comes first in the join. And somebody's going to ask the question, what if we go ahead?
Yeah, I think the vendor one, the right one, the left one.
What about
would come first?
The first one that comes is the left, the second one is the right table. What would happen if you switched them?
So it would also switch its place?
If you switch them, suppose I switched vendors and invoices, but I still wanted childless parents, I could change it to a right outer join and I would have the same thing. Okay. Now, go ahead.
Yeah, so if you change the place, it will also change in the results in the table?
If I change it, let's let me make a copy here. And I'm going to change the vendors. I'm going to move the vendors here. And I'll move the invoices here, right? So now they're changed. Right outer join. This is the same table. Which way is this one pointing? This one is pointing left. Well, it's pointing to the parent table. So childless parents, the join points to the parent table. Vendors is the parent. Childless parent, the join points to the parent table. So this one is going to give me the same output, the same 88 rows as the last one did. And in fact, since they're ordered by, the output is identical. So I can switch them, but it does matter which one is on the left and which one is on the right, because this has to be pointing in the correct direction. Now, I fussed a little bit about this one. I said, I always put the parent table first. Therefore, whenever I write a join, I am usually, most of the time, more than half the time, writing a left outer join. I will write a right outer join in a heartbeat. I mean, it doesn't bother me a bit. But my parent table is on the left. I just do it that way. You don't have to do it that way. You could put the parent table on the right. In that case, it would turn into a right outer join. But if you put some method to your madness about how you write this stuff, you'll be a whole lot better off. So I put the parent table, the one side, on the left and the many side on the right. So if I were joining invoices to invoice line items, the invoice would be the parent and the invoice line items would be on the right. Left outer join. Here I see everything from the vendor's table in the join. So this join is going to give me everything in the direction that it's pointing. So it's pointing left, everything from the left side, and only those things from the right side that participate. However, in the where statement, I'm paring it down. I'm saying I'm not even interested in those things that are in the left table, excuse me, the right table. I'm not interested in anything about invoices. The only thing I want to see here are childless parents, vendors with no invoices. Why? Because that's the way I made up the problem. Maybe you want to see both of them. Maybe in your application, what you're trying to do, you're going to say, I want to see invoices also in the output. And that's quite possible. There's nothing wrong with it. Most of the time, I think I ask for, just show me childless parents. Okay. What would happen if I took this query and I will send this out. It's a little out of order here. I'll try to straighten it out a little bit, and I'll send it out to you in an announcement. Okay, I'm going to take this query, and I'm going to change the left outer join. I'm going to get rid of the where. I'll comment it for now. I'm going to get rid of it, and I'm going to change the left outer join to a right outer join. So instead of a left, now I've got a right. Okay, which way does the join point? Points to the right. My convention is that the parent table goes on the left and the child table goes on the right. That is just a convention. That is just what I do. I don't say that you have to. It might be too much trouble to try to enforce that. But I always begin with the one side to the many side. And so I go from one to many every time I do it. Okay. So this one is pointing to the right. Which table is it pointing to? That's not rhetorical.
Vendors table?
Does it point, which table is on the left?
This one is pointing to invoices because it says right outer join, so it's supposed to be pointing at invoices.
Very well. It points, let's see, who do I have online here? I can't.
We both are on the line.
I know, I have your names here. I have Anita and Sal. Okay. Anita, you okay with that?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Actually, I was just confused because you write it into the 2 lines. So I always think it's as a 2 line, but I forgot, like you said, if the line is too big, you can, yeah, that's why.
Okay.
That's my problem. Okay. Now I get better.
Mm-hmm. So on the right is invoices. So this one's pointing to invoices. So what am I going to see here? Invoices, all of the invoices and only the vendors that participate. Okay. So I might see some, let's see what happens when I execute this thing. I see, let me change it. I need to see the, let's go back up here. I need to see the invoice number also. So I'm going to see all of the invoice numbers because I put them back in there. Paste. Okay, now I'm interested in all of them again. So maybe I'm not. So I see the invoice number. So what do I have here right at the beginning? I say order by vendor name. Therefore, what do I have here? I have an invoice number with no vendor name. What is that?
the null value indicate like it's a parentless?
Parentless. Yes. What do we call something? What do we call a poor child that has no parents?
Uh,
That,
like
in English we call that an orphan.
orphan, yeah.
An orphan. Mhm.
Yeah, orphan.
So
I
there
think
were,
it's extra money coming in.
I suppose it could be. We have an invoice that is not assigned to a vendor. Actually,
Professor, I can't hear you.
how about now?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay, I have a switch on my cord that I apparently bumped. Okay. What is this? Yeah, somebody was telling me that in the chat, but that's okay. I think I've got it back on now. And I'm going to do a test. I'm going to turn it off and I'm going to test my microphone. Okay, I can see whether I'm broadcasting or not. Okay, so we have null invoices with no parent. So the vendor's the parent, but that's okay. All I have to do is look at the invoices table. I do not need an outer join to find orphans. I can find orphans by simply looking at the child table where the foreign key is null. That's easy. Don't need a join. Let's scroll down a little bit. We got 114 rows here. If I scroll down and down and down and down and down and down and down, scrolling, 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 scrolling. Where is it? There's one in here. Well, I guess I don't have. What would it mean? Let me see if I can do this. I'm going to go to my Object Explorer. If you guys would like to take a short break, or do I just go ahead and finish? I'm going to go to the databases. I'm going to go to my AP database, go to my tables.
So 5-minute break?
Yeah, if you want to take a 5-minute break, go ahead. I'm going to.
Thank you.
I'll start again at 9. Well, I'll start again at 9:18. I'm going to pause the recording. Back from break, I am resuming the recording. I put a couple of records in here where I'm getting null vendor names, and I want to look at this. I want to see the invoice ID and the invoice number, and these guys, all of these guys are just the ones I'm really interested in are where it doesn't make any sense to order by vendor name, where vendor name is, Okay, so I want to see these two. I'm going to focus on those two records, and I'm going to try to figure out what's going on with them. So there they are. I've got invoice ID 114. Invoice number is this, whatever that is, and 68. I'm going to add one more item to it. I want to see the invoice dot, right? They're joined on the vendor ID, so I want to look at those, VENDOR ID. See the vendor ID. Not interested in the vendor name. I'm interested in the V dot vendor ID. Okay, so I want to see this foreign key. I'm not interested at all in the invoice number. I don't care. That is meaningless to me, so I don't need to see it. I want to see the invoice ID. This is the primary key of the invoice ID table. This is the foreign key in the invoice ID table, and this is the primary key of the vendors table. Okay, using a right outer join where I'm only focusing now on these tables. So if I select, what I'm seeing here is that I have a invalid vendor IDs in these tables. So -1 is not a valid one. 999 is not a valid vendor ID. I can see this if I go over into the Object Explorer. If I right click on this guy and I say edit top 200 rows, I can find that -1 that I just put in there. The other thing that this will pick up, where's that 999? I think it's down here at the bottom. I don't know which one that was. So I can go fix these. One of them has a vendor ID of 999, and there is not a 999 in the vendors table. That one's just 99. That's legal. There it is right there. So this one is invalid. Number 68 is invalid. I should have just looked for 68. And then finally, number 114 is invalid. What can I do with these? Well, I went out there and I found them. What would happen then if I set the vendor ID to yeah, that's conflicting with a constraint. So can I have a null vendor ID? I can go in and change that constraint. I can drop that constraint. So if I go back to my Object Explorer and I go to my constraints, let's see, vendor ID null. If I delete that constraint, not a good idea. But now it will let me put the null in there. So it accepted the null. Now when I go back and I run this again, I see that on 14 I have an orphan. Okay, it's just an orphan. Apparently that's okay. It doesn't hurt the database any. But look at line 2. Look at invoice ID number 68. This is bad because I have a vendor ID in the invoices database that does not match anything. It does not match any vendor ID in the vendors database. So this one, the 114, is just an orphan. That's fine. So if I wanted to find my invalid number, my invalid ones, I would select invoice ID, I.vendor ID. So I would select these guys from vendors, point it at the child table. Here's the important thing. The outer join points to the child, following the foreign key, primary key. where vendor name, where the parent is null. Okay. And so this is, but if the child is null, so where v.vendor ID is null, and I.vendor ID Okay, notice that if all I'd said was where v.vendor ID is null, the first one, if all I did was have the first one in there, I'm going to get all of these guys. I'm also going to get orphans. So if I execute this, this is going to give me not only invalid children with invalid parents, but it's also going to give me all orphans. So I might have a whole bunch of orphans. If I allow nulls in there, I just allow orphans. That's not a big deal. But when I put in this other constraint and I.vendor ID is not null, in other words, we have it's not null, and the invoices table isn't null. It has an invalid value in there. Now this is the one that's going to give me the one that I have to work with. So I have to do something with that. What can I do with it?
Change it, modify it.
Yeah, I could change it. I'm sitting here. I'm not a business person. I don't know anything about the vendor IDs. I mean, I know what they are in the database, but what should I do with it?
Put some notes.
Put some notes, maybe. Yes, I would certainly make notes. I would certainly send somebody a
Maybe
memo. Go ahead.
can we assign a default?
Okay, that's the question: is do we have a default? And the is kind of a good thing to look at. First of all, can it be null? What I'd like to do is just go ahead and set it to null. If I can do that, then I fixed it. So there's nothing wrong with a foreign key being null. That's fine. I just have an orphan. Go ahead, Anita.
No, yeah, the foreign key is null means like it doesn't have any ID, the proper ID.
If the foreign key is null, that means that I do not have a parent to assign that to. For example, if I have, like, for a dog and owner, okay? If a dog comes into the animal shelter and I have a place in the database to put its owner, and then I have records for the owner, but I don't know who the owner is yet.
So I just leave it blank. Null.
Well, if you leave it blank, then it gets null.
Yeah, no.
So do we allow that to happen? And the answer is sometimes you just have to. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes you don't have a choice. If I want to know your phone number, but you don't have a phone, but I have a place for your phone number, am I going to let you, if you go into Pizza Hut, I believe, for what's the first thing they ask you for? Your phone number. Right. It cannot be null. They say everybody has to have a phone number. They can't sell you a pizza unless you have a phone number. Well, I don't want to do that. So what do? They assign you the phone number of 999999999.
Right.
And that's the value that says you don't have a phone number. Now, I like having a value like that. In order for me to have a value like that and it be correct, I have to go over to the vendor ID. Yeah, it's number 68 that's bad. So I would go over, I have to go over to my parent table. The parent table here is vendors. So I would go to the vendors. Now I'm using the the GUI here, but I can do that. I can edit the top 200 rows. It'd be better to do it in SQL, but I don't want to type. And I'm going to insert a record. And I'm going to give this guy a -1. Vendor name. What vendor? Okay. Okay. Vendor name, I have to give it a name. X. Vendor address, probably can't be null. These two can be. Vendor state is, we have to give it something there. Vendor zip code is 1. Vendor phone is X, I think it'll take. Vendor contact is X. So I have to give it default terms ID. I think this one can be default account. I hope that lets me put that in there. So let's see if it lets me put a null in there. Vendor city. Vendors. Let's put something in vendor city. I think it will let me do it now. Default account number. I have to put something in there. Oh, dadgummit. Just grab one out of the blue. Here's one where I clearly put, so the zip code, I've put too many constraints on this, vendor zip code. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There, it took it. So now I have a vendor ID of -1, and this is a null record. There is no such thing. It's just, this is the parent. Well, it's got a name. We call it P, lowercase o, uppercase O, and it stands for POO, parent of orphans, even though it sounds a little obscene. So what I would do is I would go in here, and the one that was offending, 68, he was 99. I would make a note of that 999 business, and then I would set him to a -1, and it accepted that. Now when I run this query, this one, because I have put a value, I don't get anything. Okay. So my right outer join says everything's fine. If I put just this one.
So the null value never brings the -1?
If you think about it, if I, let me go back up to my inner join. If I do an inner join on vendor name, let's order by the vendor ID. Execute. And I have to say v.vendor ID because there's a vendor ID in both of these guys. So I want to see that. So I'm doing an inner join. And notice that I see the first one that I come to, the vendor name is, this is the one that's -1. Vendor name pops up there. He is legal in the, I'm gonna mute you. I'm gonna mute you guys for a minute. Okay. I'll turn your mics back on in a minute. I'm getting a lot of static. Since I gave him a valid vendor ID, the vendor ID from the invoice table matches a vendor ID in the vendors table. I will get him in a normal inner join. I can say now, show me all of them that have a vendor name of X, and those are my invalid ones. In order to do this, I have to be able to put a record into the table that has some value. If every value is legal, sometimes I just don't have a choice and I have to allow nulls. So nulls aren't always bad. If I instead, as opposed to having an invalid value in there, if I can have a null, notice that I can find my orphans. This is an orphan from invoices where vendor where the vendor ID is null. This is going to find all of my orphans. And there it is, invoice ID 114 is an orphan, has no vendor associated with that invoice. You might not like that, but whether you like it or not, it doesn't hurt the database integrity. If I have something in there that is invalid, then it hurts the integrity of the database. Get the idea? So to find orphans aren't necessarily bad. Sometimes I just have to allow orphans. I can find orphans without appealing to a right outer join. If I want to find invalid, invoices that have invalid vendors, I have to do a right outer join. And I'm looking for places where I don't have a vendor ID, but I do have a vendor ID in the invoice, where I don't have an associated vendor, but I do have an invoice that's pointing me towards that vendor. I have to do a right outer join. So we've looked at two major reasons why we would want a left or a right outer join. The first one, finding childless parents. Show me all of the vendors that have no associated invoices. An inner join is no help at all here. Can't tell you anything about childless parents. In this case, I'm going to use an outer join, and the outer join will point to the parent table. I want to find childless parents, point the outer join at the parent table. For me, that will always be on the left. It doesn't have to be. And where the child is null, I'll turn the okay. If you have a question, I think you may now unmute. I see. Okay. Sal, did you have a question?
Actually, it's not question about this. I sent you a
Okay.
canvas. So yeah.
Hang on. Do you have a question about this?
No.
Okay. So if I'm finding, if I use inner join shows me everybody that participates in the relationship. Outer join, if I want to find childless parents, I point the outer join at the parent. Now I'm going to see everybody, but if I only want to see the parents with no children, I have to say where the invoice number is null, where the right side of it, where the child side is null. So notice I'm pointing at the parent where the child side is null. That will usually, when I write them, that will be a left outer join, but if you switch the parent and child, it could be a right outer join. Okay.
And when you added -1 to that field, is it using the default ID concept?
No, it's using the parent of orphans idea that is not really discussed in the book, but if logically, I don't know, the phone number 999999999 cannot exist, that is, or maybe 000, that phone number doesn't exist. So if I make the phone number be that, then it tells me you don't have a phone number, but it's not null. So the idea being I have to put a record into the parent table that is that default value. So I have to put a telephone record in there that has the telephone number 00. So if you want to order a pizza from Pizza Hut, you must have a phone number, period. You can't order a pizza without a phone number. If you don't have a phone number, they give you 999-999-9999. That means that there has to be a customer record in their customer's database that has that phone number.
Right.
So they put one in there. This is known to database. It sounds a little bit vulgar. It isn't. In this case, it's called the POO record, P-O-O, Parent of Orphans, meaning that if you have that value, it's an orphan, but at least it's not null. We don't like nulls.
Okay. And one last thing, I have another class coming up at 10.
Oh.
So is it okay if I leave this?
Well, yeah, yes, of course. You can come back to this, and I'll be happy to look at your code. Okay.
Yes, it's just number 5. I sent you the Canvas inbox and see what's your feedback. I'm a little confused about the 10% addition portion.
Very well, very well. I will. Let me finish this up real quickly. So if I want childless parents, and then if I want invalid children, I point the outer join, I point it at the child. If I point that at the child, it gives me children that are unassociated. If I say where the child record is null, then if I do this, I will see both invalid children and, excuse me, if the parent record is null, I will see invalid children and orphans. If I also say and where the parent, and where this record is not null, now here I will see, so this one gives me invalid children. Okay, I'm about to wrap up here. Any further questions?
I thought of something, Professor, that I want to ask. Where the place you are listing where v.vendor ID, is it because that you have listed it above? That's why we don't have to define it again? Will it catch it from there?
Vendor ID is a field in
No, not vendor ID. The letter V, because in the previous select queries, you have mentioned that it was as. Like
let me finish here. I have aliased the vendors table as V, so I don't have to type vendors. If I had not done so, I would have had to have said vendors.vendor ID, and I don't like typing. So because I alias it on the from line, now I can use it any place. I can use it on the select line. I can use it on the where line. If I alias it on the select line, I can't use it anyplace else because the select line happens last.
But you have to define in every select query, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We don't have an outside variable yet.
Right. Because you mentioned in one of your lectures that the select queries are individual, so I wanted to make sure that. Okay.
Select queries are an individual SQL program. Each one of them is its own program. We're going to see later as we get particularly into the next class that they can go into larger programs. Okay.
All right. And I want to thank you. It was wonderful. I will watch it again and I will bug you again. So,
okay.
But thank you.
Okay. I might not get to it right away. I'm going to be pretty busy today and the rest of today, and tomorrow I have a procedure that I have to get ready for. Anita, questions? Anita, are you still here?
Yes. How my feed was hanged up, so that's why. Yeah, I am still here, but I am feeling much better, like confident about the learning what we learned today.
Okay.
So if I have something to ask, I will email you.
Yeah, use the Canvas email. I try to get to those right away.
Okay, thank you. Hope you feel better.
Well, I just I'm feeling fine. I have a medical procedure tomorrow, so I'll be fine. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now.